Number 10. SATHORN Unique Tower. The Thai economy boomed during the early 90s, sparking the rapid development of new skyscrapers throughout Bangkok, but the glory was short-lived. In 1997, Asia descended into a financial crisis which hit Thailand hard. The demand for large-scale construction projects diminished as the funds to build them ran dry. One of the hardest-hit structures was a planned office building and luxury apartment complex called the SATHORN Unique Tower. It was only partially finished when the Thai baht collapsed, bringing construction to a screeching halt. Today, the 49-story building sits derelict and vacant in the heart of Bangkok, where it's become a home for squatters and stray dogs. SATHORN Unique is also allegedly haunted, earning it the nickname the Ghost Tower. Several dead bodies have turned up inside the decrepit skyscraper, along with an unexplained population of creepy mannequins. To stop people from breaking in and recoup some of its losses, the building's owner had opened the tower to tourists. SATHORN Unique is just one of more than a dozen unfinished ghost towers throughout Bangkok, which stand as eerie reminders of just how quickly the economy can go from prosperous to flat broke. Number 9. Clipperton Island. Clipperton Island is a tiny, isolated atoll in the eastern Pacific, just west of Mexico. Nobody lives there now, but it was inhabited for a short time during the early 20th century. It's hard to understand how this barren island with no source of fresh water appealed to anyone. But it was abundant with guano, or bat droppings, which is a highly effective fertilizer. Eager to cash in on the valuable manure, the British Pacific Island Company built a mining operation there with the Mexican government's blessing. Around 100 men and women were moved there for work, receiving all the necessities from a supply ship that came every 2 months. These regular visits stopped during the Mexican Revolution. The people at Clipperton Island were forgotten about as they languished without food, medication, and other life-sustaining provisions. At one point, an American ship passed by and offered help, but Captain Raymond Arnault, who was in charge of the island, stubbornly refused, confident that Mexico would come to Clipperton's aid. By 1915, malnutrition and scurvy had claimed most of the lives on the island. One day, Arnault and 3 men set out in a canoe to try catching up with a distant ship, but their canoe capsized and they drowned. Only 1 man and 15 women and children remained by 1917. Captain Arnault began a campaign of rape and murder, declaring himself king of Clipperton. Arnault's wife and another woman killed him, and the handful of remaining survivors were rescued hours later by a U.S. Navy vessel. The settlement's ruins remain on the island to this day, but they don't receive any visitors due to its remoteness. Number 8. Hitler's secret French bunker. As the Allies moved in on the Nazis toward the end of World War II, Adolf Hitler planned to invade Britain from a secret bunker hidden in the French wilderness. It was one of the cruel dictator's many command centers in German-occupied territories throughout Europe, and it's where Hitler was stationed when he realized that the Nazis were going to lose the war. The bunker was codenamed Führer Hauptquartier Wolfsschlucht II. The remains of this final holdout are somewhere in northern France. Its exact location is still a secret because the country's elite Foreign Legion military uses it for training exercises. But a photographer named Mach Askat somehow managed to find it in 2018. Rare images show a moss-covered building with vaulted doors, which lead to a drab, decaying interior and a 6-mile-long, 10-kilometer tunnel. The building is filled with rusting equipment, broken pipes, and missing floorboards. Hitler only actually used the bunker once. He held a meeting there in 1944, during which one of his generals, Erwin Rommel, proposed ending the war. This obviously infuriated Hitler. An Allied air raid interrupted the meeting, forcing its attendees to take refuge in a bomb shelter. After it was over, the dictator fled for Germany and never returned. Number 7. End of the world cinema. During the 1990s, a Frenchman named Dien Adel built a 700-seat open-air cinema in the middle of the desert near the southern tip of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. As a former drama student, he wanted to provide the growing resort town of Sharm el-Sheikh with an entertainment venue. In 1997, Easel distributed flyers promoting the theater's scheduled opening night, during which he planned to show the movie Jurassic Park. But the facility, called the 7th Art Theater, but better known today as the End of the World Cinema, allegedly lost power on opening night for unknown reasons. Some speculate that local authorities disapproved of the theater and cut the electricity on purpose. Sadly, no movies or concerts ever played at the cinema, and it was soon forgotten about. In 2014, photographs of the dilapidated structure appeared on Estonian photographer Kaupo Kika's website and rapidly went viral. Sadly, it appeared as though someone had completely destroyed the theater's seats. Local authorities closed the area to tourists in 2018, leaving us with only these viral photographs to learn about it. Number 6. PYRAMIDEN. North of the Arctic Circle in Norway's Svalbard archipelago, there's an abandoned mining village like no other. Known as PYRAMIDEN, it was originally founded by Swedish nationals in 1910. The Soviet Union bought the property in 1927 and spent the next 7 decades mining coal there. At first, hardly anyone lived at Pyramiden, but the population grew rapidly after World War II when the Soviet Union dumped money into developing the town. Dozens of buildings were constructed, including housing, a hospital, a cafeteria, a museum, and a recreational center. The population peaked during the 80s with over 1,000 residents. Despite all the funding and work that was put into Pyramiden, it was never actually profitable. In 1998, the site received an order to shut its doors. The settlement cleared out over the following months, leaving it completely abandoned. Today, Pyramiden is occupied by seabirds, seals, polar bears, and the occasional human explorer who finds their way there. Its deserted buildings stand as a testament to an all but forgotten industrial Soviet lifestyle and culture. The site is in remarkably good condition still, owing to the sterile Arctic climate. It looks much like it did when it was abandoned. Furniture, dishes, books, and personal belongings remain exactly where they were left over 23 years ago. The Soviet artwork that adorns the buildings and walls remain intact. While some buildings have decayed, experts predict that the settlement could last for 500 years. Plant life won't take over in this extreme cold, and decomposition occurs much more slowly there than it does in warmer environments. Would you like to visit Pyramiden? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. Fordlandia. In 1928, Henry Ford tried to carry out his dream of creating a community based on the values that made the Ford Motor Company successful. He also sought a new source of affordable rubber as prices skyrocketed under a British monopoly on the material. Dubbed Fordlandia, the community was built in the Amazon jungle of northern Brazil, a region with an ailing economy that Ford promised to revive. But it wasn't the utopian neighborhood that he had in mind. It was fraught with problems from the very beginning of its construction. Ford grossly overpaid for the plot of land, which could only receive deliveries of building materials during the rainy season because it was extremely difficult to get to. Already frustrated with the conditions, which included a rotting food supply, workers revolted during the project's early stages. American employees and skilled workers were housed in a nicer part of Fordlandia than their unskilled and Brazilian co-workers, who were relegated to an area that lacked a nice view and running water. Ford had originally planned to sell wood from trees that were cleared to build the community's water tower, hospitals, schools, cafe, dance hall, 18-hole golf course, and sawmill, but the timber proved to be worthless. In December 1930, a fight broke out between a brick mason and a supervisor. Workers rallied behind the mason and began vandalizing and destroying the settlement. Managerial staff escaped by ship and had to return with military personnel to get the unruly protesters under control. Numerous efforts to grow rubber trees proved fruitless, even when experts were called in to help. Nevertheless, Fordlandia remained in operation. Henry Ford died in 1947 after investing upwards of $20 million into the settlement. His grandson, Henry Ford II, took over the company. His first order of business was to cut costs, and he sold the Fordlandia property back to the Brazilian government for just $250,000. Around 100 people remained at Fordlandia in the ensuing decades. In a strange turn of events, the city has experienced a renaissance in recent years. Around 3,000 people currently live there, despite much of the infrastructure being rusted and in ruins. There's a museum at the site where visitors can get a first-hand glimpse of what life was like for Fordlandia's residents during its heyday. Number 4. Hashima Island. Hashima is a small 16-acre, 6.5-hectare island located off the coast of Nagasaki, Japan. It was home to a coal mining facility and a surrounding settlement that grew rapidly as workers and their families moved in. Concrete tower blocks were connected by a series of overhead bridges, as well as a maze of streets and underground tunnels. Shops, schools, public pools, and other public buildings sprang up to accommodate Hashima's burgeoning population. At one point, the metropolis became so jam-packed that the island was artificially expanded with landfill. People, buildings, and pathways were literally stacked on top of one another. At its peak, the city was home to 5,259 residents, with a population density of 216,264 people per square mile. To give you an idea of just how crowded it was, modern-day Manhattan has a population density of 66,940 people per square mile. As many as 6 people were crammed into each apartment. The demand for coal eventually fell, and the industry began to lag, leading to the mine's closure in 1974. After nearly a century of use, Hashima was abandoned. Many families just left their belongings behind, and the structures throughout the island were left as is. What's left of the once bustling city now sits eerily silent and crumbling from decades of decay. The ruins at Hashima are extremely dangerous. Visitors can catch a distant glimpse of the buildings during guided tours, but exploring the ruins requires special permissions from local authorities. Number 3. Ross Island. During the British imperial rule of India in the 19th century, colonial authorities established a penal colony in the remote Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The remote region, located over 800 miles, 1,287 kilometers from the Indian mainland, seemed like an ideal place for housing rebels who fought against British rule. They chose a tiny island, measuring less than 1/3 of a square mile, as the site for the prison's administrative headquarters. Inmates were forced to clear trees to make room for dozens of Victorian-style buildings, including an extravagant bungalow for the penitentiary's commissioner. Known as Ross Island, the property had tennis courts, swimming pools, a church, and elegant gardens. Meanwhile, convicts lived in deplorable conditions. They were malnourished, overworked, exposed to disease, and experimented on with malaria drugs that made them extremely sick and depressed. The prison was finally shut down in 1937 after decades of committing human rights abuses against prisoners who fought for India's freedom. During World War II, the Japanese raided the island for useful materials. It was recaptured by the Allies and permanently disbanded. The Indian government oversees the eerie crumbling ruins, which have been reclaimed by nature. Number 2. Georgia Nuclear Aircraft Laboratory. Georgia's Dawson Forest is home to the Georgia Nuclear Aircraft Laboratory, a former United States Air Force testing facility known as Air Force Plant 67 or AFP-67. Built during the early 1950s, the clandestine site was used for exposing military equipment to radiation. Working in partnership with Lockheed, one of the military's main goals was to determine whether it was possible to develop a nuclear-powered airplane. The facility's nuclear reactor was unshielded. Whenever it was turned on, employees had to retreat into underground bunkers. All the trees nearby lost their leaves from the radiation. The facility was closed down and dismantled in 1971. Most of what went on there remains top secret to this day. All that's left of the facility are the concrete pilings and husks that were left behind, as well as the building's foundation and a smaller structure nearby. Portions of the site are fenced off, inaccessible to the public today just as they were when it was in use. The underground tunnels and bunkers that housed personnel when the reactor was in use were filled in, but people continue to search for them. Thankfully, there's no detectable radiation at the site. Number 1. Bannerman's Castle. Pulliple Island is located just 50 miles, 80 kilometers north of New York City in the Hudson River. After the Revolutionary War, General George Washington signed a plan to use the island as a military prison, but it appears as though it was never built. An entrepreneur named Francis Bannerman bought the 6.5-acre, 2.6-hectare property over 100 years ago in 1900 as a storage place for excess military equipment. He planned to house his goods in an eccentric Scottish-style castle, but the building was only partially finished when he died in 1918. Construction stopped, and in 1920 a gunpowder stash exploded, destroying part of the castle. In 1950, the only ferry that serviced the island sank, leaving Bannerman's Castle abandoned. New York State bought Pulliple Island in 1967 and became the castle's official new owner. 2 years later, a fire raged through the building, causing it to become dangerously unstable. In 2009, motorists from a nearby highway looked on as more of the castle collapsed. It's almost like the castle is cursed. Its exterior walls still stand, but its interior walls and floor are destroyed. The site has been further damaged by trespassers and vandals. An organization called the Bannerman Trust is currently working to preserve the castle and make it safe for visitors. Thanks for watching. Which one of these mysterious abandoned places would you like to visit? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.